Anyway, welcome everyone. Welcome to our Diversity and Inclusion in the Workplace panel discussion powered by Diversify in Her Space. We are having these panel discussions every month since December 2020. So I guess we came to like number 16 by now. Each month we cover a different topic. And since April is Autism Acceptance Month, we've decided to have the topic for this month on neurodiversity. I would just like to say that this used to be Autism Awareness Month, but since last year, in order to foster acceptance and change, it is named Autism Acceptance Month. So, okay, I will do the introduction of myself, and the panelists will introduce themselves. What we usually do for our participants with visual impairment, we say our name, but we also described ourselves. So I will start. My name is Eva. I'm the program director of Diversify. And I'm a white woman with light straight hair, black jacket, and yellow background. Okay, Rune, can you briefly introduce yourself?
Yes, I can. Yeah, my name is Rune. Thank you for having me, Chisholm and Eva, and inviting me to this event. It's really good to shed some light on neurodiversity. So my name is Rune. I'm an entrepreneur. I started Excalibur Startup Academy, which offers a web course on entrepreneurship, and also we do workshops. But in addition to that, I'm currently doing my second master's in innovation and entrepreneurship. I grew up right outside of Oslo. To describe myself visually, I have brown eyes, a bit of a beard, mustache, and brown hair. And whenever I travel to Italy, for example, or Spain, people always come up to me and asking me about directions in their native language. So I guess I kind of look Italian, although I'm Norwegian.
Yeah, you have that Latin look. Okay, can you introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello. My name is Chisom Daisy. I am an economist. I am the founder of Diversify, a diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging enthusiast and practitioner. And I am a Black woman, curly hair, bangs over my face, a bit over, like just above my eyes. Currently have a cough, which is why I sound like this. Happy to be here to learn. Really excited to be here to learn from Rune and Naseda and everybody else. So yeah, looking forward to this.
Thank you, Chisom. And last but not least, Naseda.
Hi everyone, my name is Naseda. I have a vastly different accent to everyone else because I'm from Australia. It's currently 9 p.m. here. So I am an autistic woman. I'm 23. It's my birthday. Sorry, I don't want to brag, but today's my birthday. Thank you. So I'm 23. I was 22. So I'm an autistic woman. I am a producer, event coordinator. Oh my goodness, Stephen's saying happy birthday. Thank you. I share stuff on LinkedIn about my experience. I have shared stuff on LinkedIn about my experiences as a neurodivergent person in the workplace. And since went a little bit viral with that, so that's a bit interesting. So and I since all of that have started talking to organizations and individuals about how to make their processes more neuro-inclusive. To describe me, how do I describe my setup? Holy guacamole. Okay, so I have short blonde hair. It's got little flicks at the end. I also have a fringe and glasses. The jacket that I'm wearing has a lot of sparkles on it. So it's got a glittery multicolored star and leopard print collar. As for my background, I have 3 frames behind me and colorful pillows and a blanket and a big smile. And I also am using a sensory toy, which is a squishy green ball. That's, I think, as succinct as I can make it. Yeah.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you, Naseda. Thank all of you, and welcome to the panelists. So I'm going to start with the first question, which is going to Chisholm. So what does neurodiversity mean to you, Chisholm, and what conditions are considered neurodivergent?
Okay. So neurodiversity, just for definition, is essentially the range of differences that in how people's brain function or behavioral traits. So essentially, I think that the framework of neurodiversity recognizes that people experience and interact with the world around them in many different ways, so there's not one right way of thinking, of learning, of behaving, of interacting, and differences are not viewed as deficits. The word neurodiversity in itself refers to diversity of all people. It is often used in the context of autism spectrum disorder, ASD, and other neurological or developmental conditions such as ADHD. Neurodiversity, just a little bit of history, the movement really began in the 90s, and it was actually led by, autistic people in the spirit of self-advocacy to increase acceptance and inclusion of all people and their neurological differences. The term neurodiversity was coined by Judy Singer. I believe she is an Australian sociologist, I think so, to promote inclusion of those who are minorities on a neurological basis. So neurodiversity essentially is a form of social justice movement. So think of things like allyship, right? It's a form of social justice movement. Nonetheless, it is increasingly gaining momentum and informing research and how medical practitioners address disabilities and neurological conditions. So for types of neurodiversity, it's quite diverse, but some that come to mind like dyslexia, ADHD, bipolar disorder, anxiety disorder, autism spectrum disorder, as I mentioned, say Tourette's, Down syndrome, epilepsy, obsessive compulsive disorder, borderline personality disorder, it goes on and on. So it just depends, yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Chisholm. So Naseda, as an autistic person, how do you define autism?
I read this question and I honestly had a little giggle to myself because I thought, oh, geez, how do I actually define the condition that I've got? Because in terms of what's medically defined and what the actual experiences are so vastly different. I would describe autism as being they describe it as a neurodevelopmental disorder. I don't like the word disorder because it's merely just a brain difference. My brain is wired differently and adapts differently to different sensory and social environments, which impacts my communication, socialization, sensory processing, emotional processing skills. And various different studies sort of have theories of what the actual difference in brain function is. I believe that a lot of what my autistic traits are defined by are due to sort of a hyperactive stress response, being that the world around me is so much more vivid and overwhelming and overstimulating than others. And this contributes to various different barriers that might stand in my way, being, and social interaction and all different kinds of things. So while there's plenty of definitions for autism, but I think it really sort of depends on the person, because everyone has such varied experiences and things like that. It's really hard to say this is the clear-cut definition. In medical autism, it doesn't account for sensory differences. So for example, so there's various different ways to describe it, but that's how I would define it for myself, as being sort of this vivid and visceral experience of the world.
I actually love that definition, vivid and visceral experience of the world. Oh,
I'm going to
it's
write that
actually-
down. I just came up with
Yes.
it.
Oh my God. I hope everybody writes it down. Oh, thank you to say that. Thank you. This is wonderful. Okay, so now we go to Rune. So you identified as a person with ADHD. So how do you define ADHD, and what is the likelihood of misdiagnosis of ADHD?
Oh yeah, thank you, Iva, and thank you for your answers as well, Tristan and Nasida. Very illuminating and interesting indeed. Always enjoy hearing how other people experience life. So very enriching to hear. The thing with ADHD, so it stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, and so I myself, I have ADD, which just stands for Attention Deficit Disorder, which goes into the category of ADHD. But as a child, I was very hyperactive. So I kind of lost the hyperactivity in adult life. But to answer your question, Iva, for example, when it comes to getting a diagnosis as a grown-up, so ADHD is one of those diagnoses that it's one of the diagnoses that is given the highest occurrence of given diagnosis or something like that. That a lot of grown-ups they kind of realize that they have it past childhood. But in order to kind of get that diagnosis and go through the testing, so to speak, you have to be able to show that you had tendencies or that you were hyperactive as a child, and that you had like some severe that kind of created some challenges. And essentially, what it is that it happens due to a lack of dopamine in the brain. So regular people, they have a dopamine level that kind of stimulates the brain so that you don't have an inability to kind of on your impulsivity and you can regulate your distractedness and behavior better. But for ADHD people, they have like that lack of dopamine level in their brain. So you have to take a medicine called Ritalin, for example. There are other supplements you could take as well, but that will essentially enhance your dopamine level. It makes you better able to react in everyday situations. But yeah, and most people can recognize themselves in like being impulsive, being distracted, being hyperactive, especially in this digital age, right? But the difference with a person that has ADHD is that it actually this is a problem that makes everyday planning and organizing and social skills and life mastery more challenging. So as a child, for example, that results in later development on language skills and motoric skills. And as a teenager, it can become more difficult to understand social codes and hard to keep up with academic pressure. And then as an adult as well, there's a lot of challenges when it comes to organizing and planning life and maintaining a job and keeping up, being very productive in the job, because since you get distracted, things might take a bit longer than others. So that can be disadvantageous. Yeah, so I got some funny stats here as well. It's like 25% of inmates in the UK have ADHD. It's quite a big number. And you're actually 20 to 25% more likely to struggle with addiction. So stuff like drugs and alcohol, for example, because you seek that kind of you seek external stimuli, so to speak, and you have a bigger difficulty in regulating yourself. So, and in Norway, at least, I think 2 to 3% of grown-ups have it. And there's a big gender disparity for kids because more boys than girls gets it, but in well, like for grown-ups, it's kind of equally distributed. Um, yeah, and you're also more likely to actually have injuries. So like breaking a leg, for example, and stuff like that. So and 75% of people with ADHD, they also have other diagnoses, such as depression, anxiety, bipolar disease, dyslexia, autism, Tourette's, and other things. So I personally, I had a diagnosis of dyslexia as a child, but and I got ADHD as a grown-up. But we can get more into that later, I guess. But that's a bit some of the basics on it.
Okay, thank you, Rune. This is so good to know. I mean, we've just started and oh, I just want to know more. Okay, so we're back to some. How has neurodiversity evolved within the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging discourse globally and more specifically in Nordics? And is there a need to further engage and amplify this topic?
So my very short and biased answer, it's very slowly evolving. Like it feels like it's snail pace. I think even to this day, if you look at it from like a workplace perspective, like many companies are working towards DEI initiatives, especially like after 2020 at the backdrop of the BLM movement, and so they're working towards DEI initiatives and being inclusive. However, for a lot of them, neurodiversity or even disability inclusion are rarely included in those critical conversations that they have on how they can create a more inclusive environment. So even on that basis, you think about inclusion. Inclusion has to work for 100%. But when you both consciously or unconsciously exclude, people who are neurodiverse or people who have a disability, then whatever initiative you're putting forward is not as inclusive as it could be. I think I read somewhere a while ago, that although about 90% of companies claim that they prioritize diversity, only 4% of them include disability in their initiatives or even neurodiversity in the initiatives. And that is a stark figure, right, to think of, so I think it is safe to say that in countries across the world, that percentage might differ, but the inclusion of people who are neurodiverse is significantly lacking. I think we can say this for the globe and we can say this for the Nordics. I mean, we've been having conversations around, I've been very much engaged in the whole DIB conversations in Norway, for example, and I rarely hear about neurodiversity unless like we or somebody else in our community is bringing it up, so I think especially in the Nordics, because I'm just thinking from this perspective, I'm not speaking for the US, the UK, Australia, wherever, but just like my experience in Norway is that I think there's a sense that neurodivergent people or people with disability are the responsibility of the government. It's not necessarily something that the workplace takes on. And I mean, of course, it also depends on the depth and the visibility of one's neurodivergence, so is there a need to further engage and amplify this topic? Absolutely. Even within the DEIB field as a whole, like a lot of DEI practitioners are still scrambling to learn more, about this. Like there's not enough known about it. It's not been discussed enough, and there needs to be more visibility and discussions around it. And even myself, I'm, actively learning about this. Like one of the reasons why, and I think like most things in life, sometimes we only start to care when people we know are affected or we are affected. Like I come from my older brother is dyslexic. My best friend has bipolar disorder. I have an anxiety disorder. And when I was at university, I was diagnosed as ADHD or having ADHD, and this was kind of just like when I started going down that rabbit hole, like, what is this? What does that mean for me? How can I operate in this world? And is that why I do this and why I do this like this? I think it's just like also just that non-stop process. And I think, you know, kind of like what Nasida said, and also Runa said, just looking at the diversity of what this means, it's really difficult to understand all the different conditions and different ways in which they show up for different individuals. So I think that in order, just to conclude here, then in order to have like a truly holistic conversation about DEI in the workplace, in the society, you know, companies, leaders, politicians, the governments, you know, they also have to consider neurodiversity and invisible disabilities. It is also our responsibility as individuals, as people, as well as, say, our leaders' responsibility to do the work and to learn, because apparently there is, I think research shows that 1 in 5 people navigates the world with some type of neurodivergency, right? In terms of like how they learn, how they think, or the perspectives in which they have. So more work should absolutely be done, like we're far, far away from where we need to be.
Yes, definitely, you're right. But more and more people are actually starting to talk about neurodiversity, and like famous people coming out as dyslexic, like Richard Branson or Jim Carrey or Leonardo Bloom. And there are more and more people who talk about that. So as you said, Chisholm, slowly it's coming. Okay, so let's move on to Nasida. So what does neurotypical mean? And can you explain neurotypical bias and what barriers it produces in the recruitment process for neurodiverse people?
Oh, strap in for this one, folks. Because honestly, this is a big question. But I'll start off with the first part. What does neurotypical mean? So neurotypical basically is a term used to describe people that are of typical or quote unquote normal cognitive and brain functioning. So those are people that are not identified as neurodivergent. On the flip side, neurodivergent people are described as people who are part of what we call a neurominority. So that's what was described before as, you know, autism, ADHD, mental health disorders, learning disorders, Tourette's, all them can be described as neurominorities. Some people within those neurominorities may choose to call themselves neurodivergent, and that's where this conversation begins. So the neurotypical bias basically talks about the way our world is currently built and functions and things like that, being based on the standards of neurotypical functioning and things like that. So not taking into account that, you know, such a large portion of people are neurodivergent and do work very differently, do think very differently. So the way that this creates barriers in the recruitment process, so many ways. So basically, I think the reason why I've been given this question is because I need to slow down. I'm talking a million miles an hour. I just want to get it all out. But I think the reason why I've been given this question is because I wrote an article on LinkedIn about the neurotypical standards of professionalism when I was a job seeker. And I received an interview guide from a recruiter that basically perpetuated what I call neurotypical standards of professionalism. And they're the standards that we sort of hold to be the highest standard of professionalism, being make eye contact, don't fidget. So none of this, chuck that away. Don't wear bright clothes. Don't, make sure you smile and nod. Make sure you use hand gestures and be enthusiastic and be concise and use this way of speaking and things like that. And I read that and I just thought, this goes against every sense of my being and my neurology. I do not work like that. I cannot sit still and talk to people like this. I need to move. I need to go on my tangents and things like that in order to get my point across. That is just how my brain works. So the neurotypical sort of standards of professionalism are just one example of a barrier that exists for neurodivergent people, because there's this expectation that we need to behave a certain way, and that if you don't behave in that way, that you're less professional or less friendly, or you're serious, or you're blunt, or you're too airy or too much, or anything like that, too sensitive or things like that. So all of those things are words used to describe us when we're really just being ourselves. And that's one example of a barrier that sort of exists for us because we don't fit that sort of standard cookie cutter approach to professionalism in the workplace. And in the recruitment process, it can also be sort of identified by, you know, just the way a recruitment process is stereotypically structured, in that you've got a job ad. You require someone to write a lot of information about themselves. You think if someone's got dyslexia and they're not great at expressing themselves through writing, you're asking them to write a 1-page cover letter and a 2-page resume and a 1-page key selection criteria and complete this task, complete that task. And maybe they, for example, aren't able to express themselves as well because that's not their mode of working. Or for someone else who maybe has social anxiety, knowing that they have to go into an interview and talk can be so intimidating that they actually can't get the words out that they want to and don't feel like they're presenting themselves in the best way. So what is meant by the neurotypical bias is the expectation that everyone can sort of perform the same things to the same level, and if they can't do that, then they're not good for the job, when really it should be more focused on adapting the recruitment process. And I think we'll probably talk about this in more depth later, but adapting the recruitment process and the employment process to be flexible, adaptable and adaptive to people's strengths and preferred methods of communication and expression and things like that, which make people feel more comfortable. And another thing that I've also sort of been chatting about with people is the fact that interviews currently sort of they kind of test people's social skills, and it's kind of a quiz, like a bit of a test to see how you perform under pressure. And we shouldn't want that from people. We should want people to do the best that they can and show themselves in the best light possible. Like, it shouldn't be this whole you know, see how they perform under pressure, because you'll see that later. There's already enough pressure for them being there. Let's just make people feel comfortable and welcome. And I think the neurotypical bias around that is that there's this expectation that to be professional and to be a good worker, you need to be able to handle high pressure situations. It's like, okay, maybe not. Let's just pare it back a bit and focus more on what the skills and values and things like that of a particular role require, and see if they align with your organization and things like that. So that's a very roundabout way of answering your question.
Thank you, Naseida. Oh my God, I think a lot of people and a lot of us, I must say, me too, recognize ourselves in in what you said. Yeah, how this process, yeah, it's so different for different people and can be so much pressure, and you feel like you cannot express yourself and you cannot show yourself, and you're wondering like, but I can do this job. Like, what was wrong? I can't do this job. So yeah, let's all hope for yeah, better processes and that things change a little bit more rapidly, but let's see. But anyway, let's continue with Runa. Many neurodiverse people take medication, so they would, in their behavior, performance, etc., come closer to the neurotypical. Does this have any effects on the person, for example, in terms of being included for who you are? And can you explain to us or explore positive and negative impacts of that?
Thanks, Ava. Great question. And I love this topic because it comes very close to heart. First, I would like to say that I'm very glad that I'm not neurotypical and that I'm neurodivergent, neurodiverse, because I see ADHD as a superpower, pretty much. Because like what you see, so like in my previous answer, I mentioned a lot of stats on like what it is and the negatives. Like, for example, like 25% of inmates in UK prison have ADHD, right? Or that a lot of people struggle with addiction. But I didn't mention the positives. So, for example, people with ADHD, they're highly creative. They come up with lots of ideas that neurotypical people don't come up with. They're like, I often find myself being in a position where you kind of, you're more of a visionary when you have this, because like you can see bigger perspectives that others can't. So you're in essence, you're a resource to any job, because you can actually be more, you can help them with innovation, which is why I love entrepreneurship. And that's another thing. It's what of all the professions, I think a lot of entrepreneurs and people working with innovation has ADHD. There's a lot of examples, like you mentioned Richard Branson earlier. He obviously identifies with his dyslexia, but he also had ADHD. Ingvar Kamprad, who started IKEA, right? So there's lots of positives. So, but yeah, I remember first time. So back to your question on Ritalin. First time I took it, I was self-medicating on it while I did my master's in the UK, and I remember taking 2 pills, and I was like, I got this epiphany. I was like, whoa, is this the way normal people see the world? That was my feeling, and it was like such an epiphany, and that's kind of when I realized that I probably had some neurological things I needed to work with, because I saw that I struggled with that, like doing that master's more so than others. So that's the thing, like when it comes to productivity, when it comes to like structuring the day, when it comes to getting things done, Ritalin is essentially a very good tool to use. I find, like, a lot of people don't use it and don't like it because they feel like their personality, for example, is they put a lock on their personality, for example. But I myself, I find that I'm more productive, more constructive. Like, for example, my thoughts as well, back to like anxiety, for example, because that's also something I struggled a bit with while I did my master's in the UK, and I had a lot of thought patterns that wasn't helping me at all. A lot of negative thought patterns. So by the time I got prescription to have Ritalin, and because I had the diagnosis like when I was 30, yeah, 30, I got the diagnosis of ADHD, and then I got the prescription to do the medicine afterwards, and really helped me out. I feel like my life have just things have really started to progress. Like, I feel like if I had only done that earlier, then maybe I'd even progress and have more success in my life. I don't know, but I feel like a more happy person doing it, and I notice it as well. Like in the summer holiday, for example, when it goes like 5 to 6 or 7 days when I haven't taken it, then my thought pattern starts to like. There's like your brain is like a high-speed train because there's so many thoughts all the time. So, but when you do take Ritalin, it's like it calms the storm, and you kind of get more clarity. But the disadvantage, obviously, is like sleeping pattern, for example. Sometimes when I take my second pill of the day a bit too late, for example, I struggle sleeping. Yeah, so that's one thing, and higher heart rate, or that's that type of stuff. So, and there are antidotes. There are other things you can do, but those would be so many. Like, you would have to meditate, and you would have to like do high intensity training, vocational therapy. You would have to do so much, like to be at that level if you don't want to take your medicines. But yeah, it's up to each person. But I personally, I find that I have to take it to like produce at the same level as others, which can be kind of the fact that you feel like you have to take it might not be a positive, but yeah, to me it helps us at least.
If I may, Eva, just add to that, just thinking back to when I first was diagnosed as ADHD, and I was like, sure, I'm going to take medications, and I was put on Adderall. and it was the worst thing that could have happened to me. You know, just I had a negative reaction to it, and it didn't feel good. So I made a decision to stop taking medications and then just figure out how I manage whatever I was feeling at the time. And of course, like, this was many years ago, and, you know, like, there was still probably layers of stigma attached to that diagnosis at the time. And also, I think it was also, like, you know, Rune said earlier, just it was easily handed out, at least in that, what I consider my generation in that time. Like, everyone had ADHD, so it also kind of felt convenient. But I did not have a positive relationship or reaction to the drugs I was put on. So I kind of just like stopped and tried to figure out other ways to manage whatever I was feeling. But also to say that then, you know, my best friend who has bipolar disorder, you know, for her medication was definitely a lifesaver. She didn't like when she had to take a pill every single day. So because, of course, having to do that in some sense can make some people feel ill. But if you have more creative ways to facilitate medication, so she takes an injection once a month, and that's all she needs to do. And, you know, that has been a lifesaver for her. So of course, like, it's different for different people.
Yes, thank you, Chisholm. Thank you, Runa. That's very interesting to know how basically on what. Yes, Runa.
I was just wondering, Chisholm, if you also tried other type of medications like audio ones, for example, or Concerta.
No, I stopped at Adderall, but I also am notorious for not liking medications. Like, you have to almost force me to take like a hay fever medicine, and I get hay fever, or even paracetamol, you know, so I'm not a big fan of swallowing pills or anything like that. So I think there's also that innate aversion to it. Yeah, but I went more like the, you know, meditation and wellness routes.
That's good. Yeah, because like Adderall is quite a it's a strong kind of medicine, and I know it's prescribed a lot in the U.S. Here not as much, but and some people I know with Ritalin, like some people works on some people, but other people prefer audio ones, which is like more, I guess you can call it natural medicine of sorts. Yeah, different preferences.
Okay, thank you, Chisholm. Thank you, Rune. It's good to know about the medication and how it can help, but it can also be, be kind of bad. And it's great to know that you can find different ways of dealing with let's say, your condition. So to move on, we're going to Naseda. So Naseda, in our initial conversations, you noted that a possible solution is to provide neurodiverse people with more of the support they need rather than treating their condition with medication. Can you further elaborate on this and clarify the pros and cons?
Yeah, I'm just going to off the bat say that, you know, this is a much larger conversation, and when it comes to talking about medication and treatment and support, none of us are medical professionals either. None of us are psychologists. So, well, at least I'm not. We are just people with lived experience. So definitely don't take anything of what at least I say as gospel. This is just purely my opinion and experience and things like that. And just based on people that I know and am connected with as well. The way forward that I think is going to be more inclusive and more accepting and more understanding of neurodivergent people is to educate those around us on how to support us in our natural state, in that with our neurology as it naturally functions and things like that, because there is this, you know, underlying expectation that we need to be the ones to fit in. And some people work with that. Some people are fine with that, with you know, taking medications or going to therapy or doing the things that they need to do to fit the mold that life gives us. Whereas what can really help us most is not having all of that be just on us. And what I mean by that is having more with, you know, the people around us, our families, our friends, our workplaces, our colleagues and things like that, helping them to understand us by creating adaptations in the way that we work and communicate, socialize and interact that suit us. So I know personally, like if we're talking about medication, this is just from, you know, groups that I'm in and things like that, people that I know that have both autism and ADHD. Sometimes I've heard anecdotally, that some autistic people that take ADHD medication, it seems to enhance their autistic traits, being more sensory sensitivities, more likely to melt down and become anxious, become depressed, things like that as well. So it really is kind of like a balancing act in our mind of, okay, what's the bigger issue? Is it the productivity and efficiency of work, or is it the sensory processing? And then having to come up with that sort of balance is a really difficult contemplation to have. So for me personally, like I was on an antidepressant, and didn't really work to try and help with my meltdowns and stuff. And now I'm trying another one. I'm like, okay, well, maybe I have ADHD. Then the psychiatrist was like, you'll know you have ADHD if you try the medication and it works. I'm like, that doesn't seem right. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll just manage those traits myself, because I know that there could be all kinds of different effects. Whereas if I can sort of take stock of my environment and my situation and see what strategies I can try and work with on the ground, also with the help of, you know, allied health support and professionals and things like that, and peer support groups and things like that as well, that it really is a different combination for everyone. There's no one size fits all with this kind of thing. And then there's plenty of neurodivergent conditions that can't be medicated. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there's medication for learning disabilities. So, you know, that's a massive chunk of the neurodivergent community and things like that. So to say that it's, you know, oh, well, here's a solution, thinking that it's a solution mindset kind of says that the way we are naturally is wrong, and things like that. If it helps people live a more fulfilling and happy life, absolutely, 100% go for it. But the supports need to be in place in our circles, in our surrounds as well, just as much as the supports that we give to ourselves. So that's sort of my take on it. At least in a very brief anecdote. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. As I said, you know, we could just spend on this question, I guess, the whole the whole panel discussion, because there's so many things to unpack here. But thank you, Naseda. That was very thank you for your answer. So let's continue with Chisong. Can you give us an overview of the discussions on whether neurodivergency is or is not classified as a disability? And also, can you please reflect on this discourse and the arguments for and against this classification?
This question gives me anxiety. It's a big question, and it's I think like it requires reading a couple of articles, maybe a few books. But I'm going to try just to clarify from my perspective how I see it, because this is something that I chew on quite often, just and still there's no clear cut, you know, like answer for myself. But okay, so just to create a little bit of nuance, the social framework of disability, you know, it comes from the field of disability studies. You know, it basically informs that a person is disabled based on how the society interacts with them. So in other words, it just means that the society does not accommodate their needs. To put this in an example, imagine if we live in a world where there are ramps everywhere and there are elevators everywhere. A person who uses a wheelchair is not disabled because they can access the same things that somebody who walks can access, right? Nonetheless, even though we have a world we don't, like in this imaginary Xanadu, if there was, you know, ramps and elevators everywhere and everything was accessible, we also need to understand that providing equal opportunity and equal access is not the same thing as equity. So equality does not equal equity, right? Because people need different things even when they have the same resources to get to the point, right? So we can still acknowledge that a person in a wheelchair can experience other challenges regardless of the equal access that is provided to them. So in this regard, we need to think about disability as a systemic and structural process. And this means that because disability is structural and systemic in nature, it may limit disabled people on a socio-economic basis. For example, I think there has to be a correlation. We'd say, for example, a lot of people, as Runa said, in the UK have ADHD who are in prison, right? So I think that we also know that people with disability, for example, have limited housing option just on the basis of accessibility. And they also have fewer career opportunities, right? Because the world is created for people who are neurotypical and not created for people who are neurominority. And then, so that's the disability aspect. And then neurodiversity does not deny, at least the framework does not deny that impairments exist, say, for example, in autism. And it doesn't also deny that depending on the person, they need different accommodations. Nonetheless, I think the advocates for neurodiversity, they choose to place emphasis on the person beyond their symptoms. So there is an overlap, at least in my view, between neurodiversity and disability, right? But neurodiversity calls primarily for the inclusion and respect of people whose brains work differently from the typical. Essentially, this means the inclusion of minds of all kinds. And this requires challenging our assumptions about what is normal and what is required for a person to live well. So of course, no doubt, when we have better resources or accommodations and there is a reduced stigma, our lives increases immensely. Nonetheless, there's also a need to expand the definition of what a meaningful life is, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say here is there's a need to reframe the idea of what being useful to society is. People can be useful in different ways in society, other than the cookie cutter, A4 way that we've grown accustomed to. I saw a thing on LinkedIn, I think yesterday or the day before, and it's a picture with a man who had one arm holding a wheelbarrow, using a rope to hold one part of the wheelbarrow and then his other hand to hold the wheelbarrow. And someone tagged that caption, something that says, why are people like this working? Or we should be ashamed that we're making people like this working. And people like this work. And I thought, what the actual heck? We need to shake the idea of what able-bodied should look like. If that person chose to push a wheelbarrow and work, who are we to tell them that they cannot do that because they don't have the second arm like the neurotypicals do, right? So I think that in really this conversation of is neurodivergence, neurodiversity a disability, I really think agency is important. I have anxiety disorder. It is classified as a it classifies me in some sense as neurodivergent. I identify closer to having an invisible disability, right? So I think that agency really is important. There's no easy answer here. I think it is for some people, it isn't for others. It's just listening to the person's perspective and where they're coming from. Because for me, inherently, I don't see disability as something negative. So I'm perfectly happy to say yeah, I have a disability, and also understanding that my disability, and if you look at people who have visible disabilities, like in wheelchair, for example, it's not necessarily that they have a disability, it's because the world has not accommodated their needs. And I hope that, I don't know if that did that justice, but I hope that clarifies how confusing it is for me.
Yes, and I think it is confusing. I know that Naseda also mentioned when we talked before how some of her friends and people she knows also classify as disabled, and some don't. So I think it's very personal, individual, and how we kind of correspond to the word disability and what it means for us and what it means. Yeah. So thank you, Chisholm. Yes, I would just like to invite the audience to comment. Let's see, what do you think about what our panelists are talking about? We would really like to hear your comments and also your questions. So please be free to share everything in the chat. It's very welcome. So, okay, let's move on to Naseida. So Naseida, what are the most common misconceptions about autistic people, and how does that affect their accessibility to work or career opportunities?
Oh,
this one's a big one. I know.
Let me get out my scroll and just whoosh, and then it just rolls out all the common misconceptions. Oh goodness. Okay, where do I start? I think the biggest one that is just a large misconception in general that also feeds into work and career opportunities and things like that is the assumption that autistic people don't feel empathy, which just grinds my gears, because if anything, I feel too much. And where that stems from is the fact that we express, or a lot of autistic people, is never in absolutes. A lot of autistic people express emotions and feelings in very different ways to neurotypical people. And we also have a lot of difficulty with identifying emotions and how that corresponds to physiological sensations. So, the gut feeling, or, oh, I have butterflies in my stomach. Does that mean I feel nervous, for example? So there's this misconception that we don't feel empathy because the way that we express emotions is a bit different to others. So, if you're in the workplace and someone says, oh goodness, what's an example? Oh, my pet is unwell. For example, this is a very basic example. My inclination would be to ask more about the well-being of the pet and what treatments are going to happen to take care of the pet. Whereas some people might not interpret that as being, empathetic or caring, but just a bit prying. Whereas that's my way of showing care and interest and concern. Whereas other people might be like, oh goodness, I'm so sorry that this has happened. I am really upset for you. And, usually have a corresponding facial expression. Whereas that doesn't come naturally to me. I have the brain of like, okay, well, what's a solution here? let's work together to fix this. And that's my way of showing emotion and showing empathy. And in the workplace, that can be a bit, people might perceive that to be a bit abrasive or blunt, or direct, and not everyone likes that. People like a bit more softness, and I don't work that way. So while I do, I'm not talking to you, Siri. I'm just gonna take that off. But you know what I mean? Like people, there's this sort of assumption of like, oh goodness, oh. Anyway, that's one example of a misconception. Another misconception is that, we don't want to be included or don't care about being included in social things, just because we might be stereotypically more focused on the work or the task at hand, and maybe less interested in, the coffee chat, the kitchen chat, the after work social stuff, the what did you get up to on the weekend, that sort of thing. Doesn't mean we don't want to be included. It's just that it's not our natural habitat. No, what I mean in that is that it doesn't come naturally to us. It certainly doesn't come naturally to me. Usually activities of a social nature need to have an intention for me, or an activity or something behind it, rather than just let's go and talk, because then it's like, well, what do you talk about? Which another thing is, a lot of us struggle with small talk. So, it might be very curt answers in a very, very stereotypical sense. But it doesn't mean we don't want to talk with you. It's just that, we're not super interested in the weather. We might, want to talk about something more philosophical or whatever that might be. Doesn't mean we're not interested or don't care. We still want to be invited to the things and all of that. But just because we might be a bit more isolated, eat on our own, you know, just stay in our own space, not want to talk all the time, doesn't mean that we don't like being there, that we don't want to be there, that sort of thing as well. And then another large misconception, I think, well, it's not necessarily a misconception, but a heavy consideration, is that to get up and go somewhere and do something, such as, you know, stereotypically go to an office, travel in a car or on public transport to an office and sit there for 8 hours and then come home, takes a massive amount of energy. Like, that takes so much energy. If we have a finite energy bank, that takes up a lot of it. At least for me, it takes up about half of my energy bank, even to just get there and do the thing that is required for me to be able to do the job. That's not even the job bit. That's the framework around the job. So a misconception, well, that's not really a misconception, but just a heavy consideration is that, you know, a lot of us are exhausted just by doing things, getting out in the world, and then the stuff that comes after work as well. That can be really, really tiring. So you may get a lot of autistic people in your life that you may know prefer remote work. I know some that don't, but remote work is one example of something that, you know, we can just get almost more done, probably more done, and be more productive if we don't have to deal with the things each day that can create overwhelm and you know, discomfort and things like that as well. Took a little bit of a tangent there, but yeah.
Thank you, Naseida. Yeah, there are a lot of misconceptions and prejudice that keep neurodiverse people out of a workforce. One of the things, the misconceptions that I read about recently was how it's believed that people with autism or ADHD cannot be leaders. So the leadership positions are automatically like close to them. So even if they get some kind of a job, they should be grateful that they are here, right? And they're not even considered for anything else. I think Susanna shared that article. Susanna, if you have it somewhere near you, it would be great if you can share it in the chat for people to read it, because it was super. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you. So thank you, Naseida. Let's move on. So Rune, sorry, I have a little bit too many tabs open. So to get to the next question for Rune is the advantages of neurodiversity and neurodivergent thinking in the workplace have been discussed for a while now. And I think you also mentioned it earlier. And I hope many of you know, and who doesn't know, I think this is a great thing to know, is that LinkedIn has recently added dyslexic thinking as a skill that people can choose to put on their profile. So from your perspective, Rune, what are the advantages of being neurodivergent in the workplace?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I've got so many thoughts on like follow-ups from both your answers, Naseida, and yours, Jason. The first one being that maybe ADHD people could give people with autism a crash course on small talk.
No, I'm good without it. Thank you, though.
So, because I've actually, that's something people have told me, that I'm pretty good at small talk. And I don't know if that's an ADHD thing, but we're quite known for being extroverted. So a lot of people find it fun to be around people with ADHD. So that's kind of like one advantage, I guess. The other disadvantage of that is that when you're too social and you get distracted a lot, which I do, especially in an open work environment, you don't get much work done. So that's a disadvantage. And another thing is that it requires a lot of energy to get your, because you get distracted a lot, you can end up spending longer time on certain tasks than neurotypical people would do, right? So that can be a disadvantage. So, but having said that, people with ADHD is also known to having like a laser focus on something that captures their interest. They can actually sit on hours upon end, and I find myself doing that from time to time. And my girlfriend, she asked me like, "How are you able to do that? Sit in that amount of hours without interruptions, just being focused?" And you know, that's because you have an interest in one specific topic and you just dive into it. So that's so. One thing is that I think it's crucial for people with ADHD to work with something that they're interested in, and preferably something creative. Because if you give me, for example, an accounting job, you know, I wouldn't be, like do something that put your energy where your strength is. That would be my like main recommendation. But there's also other things like time management and setting goals and organizing the day and so on that could be good to have like a peer-to-peer kind of function, like talking with colleagues or talking with your boss or whatever. Maybe have a mentor, in the culture of openness. I think it's important from a work perspective. Um, and there was something that you mentioned, Nisita, earlier on, like having an inclusive environment, right? I think that's definitely important when it comes to openness. But so like one thing being like workplace, but all of this, like I think the whole education system should be changed rapidly, especially for kids, because it's not natural for them to sit for hours, like being very energetic, especially if you have like if you're hyperactive as well. Most kids are hyperactive, but ADHD kids are even more hyperactive. So I think changing the schooling system a bit. There's also a lot of focus on numbers rather than creativity, right? So there's a lot of changes that could have been made there. So yeah, I guess that's it's one of the things that I think, and it's on a personal level, right? Because like in any job, they have to speak with, like, it requires the person to be open about it. Because since it's a hidden disability, not a lot of people are open about it. I myself have just started to be open about it because like I feel as though I will be judged otherwise based on like productivity levels and so I just recently started to be more open on it, and that's the first step. And so when then they can start to make adjustments on, for example, how to be even more productive and so on. But the thing is, like, I'm on medication, so I function as a regular neurotypical person. I find it.
If I can add, I think just on Rene's point on, being open about it, just to nuance that, I think it's absolutely lovely, if we find ourselves in workplaces or in environments where we can openly disclose, and don't fear judgment, be they conscious or unconscious, but also just nuancing the fact that for some people this is not an option depending on who they are, the identities they wear, because imagine then, we're talking about neurodiversity, but neurodiversity is a human or condition, right? And being a human, it means, say you have if some gender, right, be it male, female, non-binary, and everything else in between. It means that you come from an ethnicity, you have a religion, you have a race, and those things, essentially those intersectionalities compounds your experience of the world in the workplace, in society, in your home. So also just saying that it's also absolutely okay to not feel like you must disclose for your basic needs to be met, employers also have a responsibility to ensure accessibility where in any way and form possible, to ensure that people don't have to say, hey, I have this or I have that, because that can also unconsciously inform the type of jobs they get. Like I also struggled, you know, when I was working in like typical workplaces to say I have an anxiety disorder because of the stigma associated with that. And also seeing how sometimes when people find out, they treat me differently, and no, I don't want to be treated differently, right? I am still absolutely functional as I am, you know. So just saying that it's also absolutely okay not to disclose if you don't feel safe to do so. Nonetheless, you know, the society, your workplace has a responsibility to create an environment that you feel like you can thrive in.
I'm also going to jump in because this is like the biggest question, I think, of the entire panel, you know, of thinking of what the advantages are, and we'll get to the disadvantages as well. And also jumping off your point, Chisholm, about disclosing. Yes, there is I'll just talk quickly about one thing that's in my mind that's going to escape if I don't mention it. Sorry. But the advantages of neurodiversity and embracing that, I've seen a lot recently about the difference between culture fit and culture add. Culture fit being, you know, seeing that the employees coming into your organization align in skills and similarities to you and the others in the workplace, which is fine. But where's the growth? Where is the difference? Where is any sort of diversity in that? Acceptance and inclusion of all forms of diversity, but in this case, neurodiversity and neurodivergent people can be considered a culture add. And that's what I think people should be considering as well, is what our experiences can add to the pool of knowledge in a team, being, you know, different life experiences, different cultural experiences, different, you know, social experiences or emotional experiences or anything like that. That's one thing to consider as well. And then also off the other point of disclosing in the workplace, just about everyone, at least that I know, who is neurodivergent and disclosed their neurodivergence at one point or another has been, you know, that has affected something somewhere. May not be in their workplace, it might be in a friendship setting, in an education setting, in public, in anywhere. People so commonly experience the feeling of being treated differently or negatively because of their differences. And that can be a really traumatizing experience to think, okay, the onus needs to be on us to get the supports that we need. Okay, what supports do we even need? How do we even know what supports we need or are available or can be made available? So by creating a wide understanding among the community, hopefully that allows organizations and those in leadership positions to be able to ask everyone what they need to help them work best, and that sort of bridges the gap a bit and makes people feel less vulnerable in asking for support.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations, because I've seen, you know, so many people commented in the chat, you know, how much they've learned through this panel discussion, and how much, you know, they have a better understanding of some of the things that we actually touched upon. And there's so many things that we didn't even touch upon. So please, people, watch discussions like this. There's so many more and more articles about neurodiversity. There are books on neurodiversity. So let's all get as much information as we can. And I also believe that all of us have some kind of neurodiversity, you know, that we just maybe know better how to manage and be more typical. So openness and being understanding of what's going on, and kind of, you know, because we are talking about like how to be authentic, how to show up the way we are. This is part of it. This is part of it. And I'm so sure that so many people are kind of hiding and feeling bad because they don't feel like everybody else, and they're trying to manage it. So this is so important. Thank you, Naseda and Runa and Chisholm, and let's move on. There is more things to learn. So Chisholm.
One thing, just on you mentioned like the workplace aspect, and how the statistic that was just added by Susie in the chat here. I just wanted to add that the Norwegian military is actually now being sued because they kind of like, if you wanted to go into the military and you said that you had ADHD, they wouldn't let you in. So they kind of like, they're being like, there's a case where they're essentially, people are trying to bring them to justice because they've been, they had a policy of like not including people with ADHD. So because like then you can, apparently if you have that condition, then you can't do military service and so on. So a lot of people feel discriminated against. Yeah, I just wanted to bring that on board because like it's still a case in Norway actually that there are some forms of discrimination against it. And this is quite recent. They've written about it in the news quite recently. So.
Yeah, the military is always keeping close borders on how they think people should be. I mean, we all know how long it took for gay people to be recognized and be acknowledged and in the military, as well as women. So neurodiversity is next, I guess. Okay, so Chisholm. For people who live with disabilities or neurodiverse, we hear that how they define themselves really matters. Can you clarify the difference between person first versus identity first language?
Yes.
And sorry, and I'm also inviting Naseda after Chisholm to chip in that.
Okay. So I think within neurodiversity, inclusive and non-judgmental language is key. So on one hand, many disability advocacy organizations prefer person-first language. So I am a person with autism, I am a person with anxiety disorder, or I am a person with Down syndrome. That is the person-first language. On the other hand, research has also found that, say, people in the autistic community actually prefer identity first language. So I am an autistic person would be an example, right? So identity first language places person's diagnosis at the core of their identity. So this is, I am an autistic person. Person first would say, I am a person with autism. So I hope that's clear. So basically, I think the way a person self-describes is actually more important than what you have heard is more respectful. Identity is personal. Agency is important, right? So rather than make assumptions, it is best to ask someone directly what their preferred language of identity is and how they want to be addressed, right? Because I think this is how we ensure that we're respectful. And, you know, this should honestly go for everything, right? It's like just an example, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to a woman who's transgender, who prefers to be addressed mostly as a woman, right? Yesterday, I spoke to a man who prefers to be identified as a transgender man. How do I know this? I ask, right? So I think like getting into that habit of asking, how do you want to be identified? How do you want to be addressed? You know, and when we cannot ask, I think because sometimes you can't ask, seek resources to learn, and the resources you should always reach for are the ones that are made for and by the community. So on the question on whether, what is the right way, is it the person first, or is it the identity first language? Ask the person. Like, it really just comes down to that agency. How do they want to be addressed? And then do exactly as they say. And then ask the next person. So don't say, oh, I spoke to Naseda, and she wants to be addressed this way. And, she's an autistic woman. So because you're an autistic woman, you must want the same, want to be addressed the same way. It's, like, one size does not fit all in situations like this.
Yeah. Spot on. I was like gearing up, being like, and this thing, and you absolutely covered it all. Because this is a very big topic, particularly in the autistic community, like you touched on, Chisholm. A lot of people in the autistic community prefer to be referred to as autistic people rather than people with autism. My personal thinking behind this, and often the opinion of people who, use identity first language, is that it is part of our identity. It is part of our neurology. Our neurology is our, identity and personality and things like that as well. It's not something I carry. It's not something I can put down. I am a person with a sensory toy. I am not a sensory toy. I can put down the sensory toy. So it's the same way that we describe nationality as well. So usually people, like, for example, I am Australian. I'm not going to say I am of Australian, or, that's, it just sort of makes sense, at least to me, to have it be more personalized. But then for other disabilities, I know people in the Down syndrome community, person first all the way. And that is the respectful way to refer to people within the Down syndrome community, and things like that, saying people with Down syndrome, person with Down syndrome. So I think what really matters as well, in my previous line of work, I was doing advisory work for an autism organization. I'd speak to a lot of parents, and they'd say, oh, but my child's autistic, but there are so many other things. There's so many other things, but my child has autism. That's not all they are. And it's like, no, it's not all they are, but it's a pretty large part of it. It's a pretty big part of it. And part of, I think, for at least the autistic community, with identity first language, it's a part of self-acceptance as well. And lots of people don't use it, and that's perfectly fine as well. It's what your diagnosis and what your condition, neurology difference means to you. That's what it's all about. So that's all I needed to chip in.
Thank you, both of you. I mean, this is really important to know, because before I spoke to you, I actually didn't know that there's a difference, and then there's a preference, and this is great to know, to actually ask a person, how do you want to be addressed? Because as I was also thinking, like, autistic person might not want to be called autistic, because not, how much do they want to be how much is it part of their lives? But just ask. It really doesn't matter. You don't have to figure it out by yourself. Okay, let's move on. So Naseda, we come again to you. When it comes to inclusion, what are the biggest challenges neurodivergent people face in the workplace, and what can leadership do to make their workplaces more inclusive and accessible to neurodivergent people? Another big one.
I just have to laugh, because again, I'll bring out the skull and just so many. Workplaces can be really challenging, and I think I did touch on this before as well. Just because of how they are set up and what is, perceived to be success or productive or professional or anything like that. One thing that I think can be quite a challenge for neurodivergent people is just the fact that this is a challenge for everyone, because if we're talking about including neurodivergent people, we need to talk about including everyone. So with that, it's a challenge that we can face is the difference in preferred communication methods, and the fact that they, can have such a different impact on us. So for example, some autistic people, some people with anxiety disorders or OCD or maybe ADHD as well, or things like that, may prefer to be in a meeting. Let's talk in a meeting, for example, where you're brainstorming ideas. To ensure everyone's idea gets heard, putting up your hand and talking about an idea or pitching in or something like that may not be as comfortable or accessible or whatever. You may not get as much airtime as someone else. There might be one person that, you know, talks a lot in the meeting. That's me. But and that sort of thing. And then you've got this whole room and not everyone is able to get a say or contribute or things like that. One way to sort of work around that is finding alternative ways for people to contribute and keeping that as a standard and a norm. So when we're talking about contributing ideas or to meetings or things like that, there's a lot of different like online whiteboard varieties of, you know, you get your sticky notes, you write down, spend 5 minutes writing down some ideas. If you prefer to say them out loud, someone else can write them down for you, that sort of thing. And then you have them all there as a collective effort. But a challenge also, that wasn't really I guess that's a challenge. I'm going off topic. I'm going to go back to the question, because another thing that can be really challenging for neurodivergent people, including myself, is not having things in written form, or an idea of structure or expectation or things like that. And that could be particularly for autistic people, and definitely people with anxiety disorders as well sometimes, and also AD. I always said ACDC. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. ADHD.
It's the music, Nasida.
No, I once saw someone I did a talk with, they had a shirt on and it was like the ACDC logo, but it said ADHD. So now whenever I think of ADHD, I have that logo in my head. Oh, goodness. All right. What was I saying? I was saying this is a particular thing. Auditory processing. So my auditory processing is rubbish, right? So what that means is you know, hearing the words and then processing them and then coming up with a response or answer. So for example, two-parter questions can be really, really difficult for me. So for example, in this panel discussion, I have the questions open next to me because I would not have remembered anything that Eva said because my brain is too focused on the first part of the question to think, oh, what was the second part? Oh, and then it just doesn't stick. So, and then also things out of the blue can be really confronting for people as well. So you think about like those spontaneous meetings of, oh, can we have a chat? Or, oh, we need to have a talk in 5 minutes, and you don't know what it's about. Like that's anxiety inducing. Am I getting fired? Am I getting, you know, pay cut, or am I hours getting reduced, or have I done something wrong? What have I done wrong? I didn't do anything wrong. No one told me I did anything wrong. Am I missing all the cues? Blah, blah, blah. So with all of that, it's setting expectations, setting parameters and setting expectations. I think that's a challenge that neurodivergent people face, in that a lot of the way workplaces work don't have those things. It's meant to be sort of intrinsically known. It's okay to go to a spontaneous meeting, or, you know, it's okay to, you know, have to hold all that information in your brain when it's being said to you verbally, or, you know, if you're in the kitchen and someone comes up with a great idea, you're meant to just remember that. Like, definitely following up things in writing can be really helpful for a lot of neurodivergent people. Another challenge that neurodivergent people face, which I mentioned before, is just the sensory environment and in the effort it takes to get there and do the thing that you need to do to actually work. Takes a lot of effort. And also another thing is that, you know, everyone's version of 100% effort looks different every day. So that's for everyone. But for neurodivergent people, it's just that version of 100% can sort of fluctuate more often and more easily. So I think more flexibility and understanding of, hey, not even calling it 80% or 70%, My version of 100% effort is less today or is lower today. It's still indicating that you can put in 100% effort, it just looks a bit different. And understanding, you know, if someone got a heap of work done yesterday, doesn't mean they're going to get the same amount of work done today, and that's okay, because it really does fluctuate and things like that. And also a lot of these adjustments help. I think there was a comment in the chat, these adjustments help everyone, and that's the whole point. So when we talk about neurodiversity and making workplaces more inclusive, having you know, example, agendas for meetings, or the questions written out for interviews, or expectations of boundaries and communication, or understanding of sensory environments. I know a lot of people that get headaches from fluorescent lights. Let's just cut the fluorescent lights. Seriously, no one likes them. But this is what I mean. These things help everyone. So in a long roundabout way, those are some of the challenges that we face. Yes. Oh, and also we're all more prone to burnout, which is a big thing as well. And burnout can look very different for neurodivergent people, because it's not only the burnout of too much work, it's too much peopling and life stuff as well. So that's also stuff to consider as well.
Okay, thank you, Naseda. So we're actually at 2:30. Which is basically the end of the me question time, and we have to go to the participants. But can all three of you, give us for the end like your top tip on how to best support neurodiversity in the workplace? If you can just really quickly say something, each of you. So Chisholm, you can start.
Yes, I can go. So I think two core things is who's in the room. That's my favorite phrase, because you need to know who you're providing solutions for. So who's in your workplace and what do they need from you? And understanding that one size does not fit all. So essentially the workplace needs to be designed for the people you have and the people you want to include, keeping in mind that you don't only design for, like, you can't say we're inclusive and we want people with disability or people who are neurodivergent to apply, but then your workplace is not created for them. So from a workplace perspective, depending on your people, you need to make adjustments to meet those needs, or, you know, work towards universal accessibility. So an employer might need to make adjustments, and Naseda said quite a lot of them, like sensory adjustments for sound sensitivity. So one thing you can do is like give noise canceling headphones, have like a quiet break room where it's quiet, where people can go for space when they need. When a drilling is going to happen in the building, on the roadside, you know, ahead of time, communicate, because people need to have expectations and then they can better manage anxiety. Like in my case, if I know something is going to happen, it's easier for me to manage the stress that comes with that. Not knowing is like one of the worst things that can happen to me. Offer flexibility in the working environment, how people do break times. Fidget toys are very important, you know, like sitting setup where people sit and things like that. And I think Naseda said also this, you know, just like in clarity, people need clarity. So use concise verbal and written descriptions when you have tasks. Don't assume that people just get it, you know, that's very ableist, and it tends to a neurotypical bias. So inform people about like what the workplace personalities are, what the norms and social etiquettes are, and give advance notice where possible. You know, if plans are changing, provide a reason for the change. Like Naseda said, you know, don't just say, hey, come meet me now, or, oh, we're not having this. Have a because. So I guess that would be it.
Thank you, Chisholm. Rune?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the things that you brought up, Chisholm, like having an enabling work environment, and don't like take things for granted, you know. But yeah, communication, that's kind of the main thing. Just get people to talk, if you have like specific needs, and be vocal about it. And also like knowing yourself, because like me as a worker or employee, and like knowing how you work, like knowing the needs you have and so on, like how you can be productive, for example, is kind of crucial to increase performance. So yeah, I guess those two things primarily.
Thank you, Donna. That sounds great. And Naseda, what will you?
I'll try to keep this super brief, which I can't do. I think my top tip to support neurodiversity in the workplace, find your employees' strengths and passions and absolutely get them to do all of that. You know, no one likes doing the things that we're not good at. No one likes that unless they like being challenged, which is a different thing. You know, being challenged and doing something that you really don't like are two very different things. So supporting neurodiversity is supporting people to understand their strengths, skills, and passions. And that is where we thrive as well. We're going to do so much better in a job that we can do the things that we like and enjoy. And that's why so many neurodivergent people are founders, are entrepreneurs, are, you know, their own CEO and things like that as well, which we haven't sort of touched on, but I think there is a question about leadership and things like that as well. So many neurodivergent people go on their own creative paths because workplaces are not adapted or understanding of their skills and their passions, and they find those passions for themselves, which is fantastic. But a large majority of people are in workplaces and have employers or are employers and things like that. So understanding what people want to do is ultimately the best thing where you can, where possible. If someone likes something a lot and they're good at it, absolutely go for it. That is where they're going to thrive. That is where they're going to bring the most value to you as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the tips. I hope people were taking notes. So now we are going to go to the section and of the participants' questions. So there is a bunch of questions. So let me start from the beginning. So there's a question from Golda via LinkedIn. Would it make sense for employees to inform their employers of their neurodiversity? How does that affect their employees' trust for them? Maybe employees' trust for them to be productive in their role. Probably she meant employers. I guess we touched upon that, but does anybody want to add to what they said previously?
I think Naseda and I talked about it. Just it's great if we have that environment where you know, you feel like you can disclose and you know that there are no repercussions and there would not be any like conscious or unconscious reaction to that in how they trust you to be able to actually execute the task that you have at hand. But it should also absolutely not be a requirement. If you don't feel safe to do so, or if you even if you feel safe and you're just like, you know, this is my business, I don't want anybody else to know, you have agency for that too. So workplaces should focus on universal accessibility and creating environments that are conducive for every single person, for all kinds of minds.
Thank you, Chisholm. So there's another question that is actually for you, but anybody else can also answer. It says, this is the first time, so Claire says, this is the first time I've heard the term neurodiversity. Instead, interested in your use of the term disability. It is a term that I'm not clear on. I was always told it was better to use term special need. Is this something else?
It depends on, I think special needs. Okay, so I have, you know, like since I have family members who have, you know, like different forms of neurodiversity and disability, we have these conversations. And I think from my perspective, I think like if you identify as having special needs, by all means, I will identify you and address you as having special needs. You know, I think that at least my understanding of the framework around special needs was in a way to take away the negativity of having a disability, because it was viewed in a sense as something negative. So if we call it special needs, you know, then perhaps that's imposed stigma by the people who also think, okay, maybe it's relevant to change this, does not translate. So basically what I mean here is to say, I remember having a conversation with my sister recently, and you know, someone had said something about you know, a child with a disability, saying, oh, but they don't have a disability, they're just different. And it kind of just blew my mind in terms of, if that child is in a wheelchair, of course everyone who walks can, like people who walk and do not have to use the wheelchair, for example, do not have to, you know, they're different, they're all different. But if we don't identify specifically that that child needs a ramp or an elevator to access the same rooms or access hospitals, then we're not actually going to create solutions to accommodate them. We're just going to say, but they're just different, we're all different. And then it almost removes responsibility from us, right? So I think, of course, agency is important, but I think also reframing how we think about disability. It's not that you have something negative happening within you or that you have stigma. It's just, what has the society created to enable or disable you from doing something? So this is kind of just how I look at it. And I'd definitely be happy to hear from Nasir and Rune and how they think about this.
Yeah. Excellent explanation, Chisholm, because the term special needs, at least for me personally, makes me cringe, and it's not anyone personally, you know. I understand it's terminology that has been used and things like that. I think of it in an education context where you know, there were the classrooms that were deemed to have, you know, oh, well, that's the special needs class, or things like that. And at least from experience, it was used in a bit of a patronizing and infantilizing manner, being, you know, oh, well, they need special treatment because they're different. It's not, okay, they operate differently, this is what they need to be supported. It's a bit more, I feel like it's a bit watered down. At least for me personally, this is just my opinion, of course. At least saying disability or neurodiversity or neurodivergent condition acknowledges that there is a clear difference, right? That is different to the norm. Because if we're talking about special needs, everyone wants to feel, if we're talking about the word special, everyone wants to feel special, everyone wants to feel different. What makes someone have special needs? You know, it's sure, I'm sure some people might prefer it, and that's fine, that's okay. But it's just from personal experience, which I won't go into, of course. It was used particularly in a school context as being quite patronizing, and it came with negative connotations. So a lot of people have that same relationship with the term.
I think there's power in naming things. I mean, call things as they are. And I think also naming things destigmatizes them. You know, you don't see something that is pink and go, no, that is definitely, I mean, sure, okay, we have this argument at our office where we have a couch that is yellow. Some people think it's orange. Sure, that happens, right? But you don't see something that is so obviously like the sky is blue. And then you're like, no, it's indigo, right? And I think like there is just that power in naming things and destigmatizing, you know, things, right? Because it's how the world also views what neurodivergency is, how the world views what its disability is. I mean, sure, we all have special needs. I don't eat meat. That's a special need that I have to, like, when I go out somewhere, I have to like make that known in a sense. So I just think like there's power in naming things, but of course it's perfectly okay as well to identify a special need, but there should definitely not be, you can't say disability or you can't say this. You should only say special needs.
I also wanted to add that you said earlier, Chisholm, that you identified with the word disability, and I just wanted to add like a personal story on this matter, because as a kid I was given the diagnosis of having dyslexia, and as part of that, like they gave me this stationary computer when I was in like 6th grade. So I had one stationary computer in the end of the classroom, and I had one at home. And just that was like, and I was also taken out of the class because I had quote unquote special needs. But having that computer and being put that label on made me different, and it made me feel like I had a disability. And I really struggled to identify with that disability. So I remember in junior high or middle school, I decided I was like, I had enough. I was gonna be treated by the same rules as the others, and I was like thinking no more. And so what I did is I picked up the biggest book I could find in the library, and I told myself I'm gonna read this from the whole book, cover to cover. And that was Lord of the Rings. So I got like super interested in that. It's like one of the reasons why I have a tattoo on my finger from Lord of the Rings today. But it took me so long. Like I looked upon it as a job. You know, I had to read 2 to 3 pages a day, and they did that. It's like I looked upon it as a job. But it was now I'm more of an avid reader though. So like a lot of my grown-up life up until I got the ADHD diagnosis actually revolved around proving to the world that I was not different. Like, so yeah, I guess like back again to the educational system, it should be changed. So yeah, then when I got the ADHD diagnosis, I really looked upon it as a gift, and it was much easier for me to identify with that. So interesting with how like we all have different associations, identify differently with words.
Thank you, Rune. Thank all 3 of you. This is very interesting. I know in Croatia they call disabilities special needs because they're trying to be more like not stigmatizing, but whatever you're saying, it absolutely makes sense. Okay, so we have a question from Emma to Naseida. Can you speak to nuance in terminology between neurodiverse and neurodivergent?
Yes, is the answer. But you ask, can you? And I will. So it's a difficult one at the moment because neurodiversity is kind of being used as a bit of a buzzword. And so people sort of use neurodiverse and when they also could mean neurodivergent. So if we're talking about neurodiversity, the world is neurodiverse in that everyone has a different brain, and that makes our world neurodiverse because there is a diversity amongst brains. Neurodivergent, in my definition, is divergent from neurotypical. So it's any sort of neurominority, being a condition that does not exist within the majority of neurotypes, that is a neurodivergent condition. So I identify as neurodivergent in that I am divergent from the neurotypical, and I live in a neurodiverse world. Some people call themselves neurodiverse. That's okay too. I think more of the tendency is to say neurodivergent, but whatever floats your boat, as long as you get those sort of differences, understanding that the world is neurodiverse. That is the model of it, and it is based on biodiversity, being that you know, the natural variation in our world. It doesn't, you know, the whole analogy of you can't judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree or whatever the thing is. It's you know, we all have different brains. One is not better or worse than the other. We're not deficit versions of normal brains. We're just different brains. So that's sort of my distinction.
Thank you, Naseida. So we're moving on. We have a question from Karin. What sort of changes can people make in their digital communication to better serve neurodivergent audiences? That's also a good question for us. I mean, good to know for us.
I want to jump in on this because, like, you know, ADHD people is known to get distracted easily, and social media is wired to distract us, right? So, and most people, like, yeah, just a big discussion nowadays is like, because like there's a increase in people that gets their ADHD diagnosis, and there's a discussion going on whether or not social media attributes to that, right? Because we like our brains are less attentive than they used to be before the like smartphones and whatnot. So I guess just being, I'm not a good example of this. I watch videos on TikTok, for example, but you know, just be concise on which apps you use, and maybe do some like digital detox sometimes. Yeah, self-discipline maybe. And there are tools you can use as well, like Trello or other type of apps. So Susanna mentioned an app in the field here earlier. So yeah, big.
Okay. Yes, Naseida.
I'm terrible.
Yeah,
Sorry.
so
Oh gosh, I'm terrible at interrupting.
We have 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
So keep your answers kind of brief and off point
Yeah.
if you can, so we can go through as many questions.
That's okay. I was just going to say very quickly, off the back of that, dot points. Oh my goodness, dot points. Everything in dot points. That is the best way. If you can take a chunk of text and put it into dot points, that is going to get your message across, and it's also going to be able to help you better narrow down the purpose of your message and your core messaging as well when, you know, describing something to anyone. So put it in dot points. If you need to fluff it out, but if you can put it into dot points, good.
Thank you. That's really great. We usually do after the panel discussions, we put it in a visual form, so it's always put also on our social media. So the takeaways. So this is a good tip. So the next question is, Rune, what prompted you to get tested and confirm your neurodivergent status?
Okay, very funny story, and I'll keep it short. I was dating a woman at a time who told me that I most likely had ADHD. And the funny thing is that she used to date guys. For some reason, she was only dating guys with ADHD. So she told me that I probably had it, and by that time I realized that it was something I needed to I needed to do a test, because I struggled during the masters I did in England, and there was a lot of things in my life where I read up on it, and I saw that I met all the criteria. So so
that tipped you off. Okay, thank you, Rune. Also from Chisom, given the stigma surrounding neurodiversity, how can workplaces respect employees' needs for confidentiality while providing for neurodiverse individuals?
Really simple. Just respect need for confidentiality. I think like it's handle it the same way you'd handle a contract that pays you a lot of money, like things you're able to disclose or things that you're not able to disclose. If an employee chooses to disclose, then and they feel the need to keep that confidential, don't go tell somebody else like, oh, you know, they have this, so, you know, be easy. No, if they don't say, okay, I want to tell that person and that person and that person, it's not your job to do. So keep it confidential and still provide the resources that they need. If you focus on creating universal accessibility to any type of point, you don't actually have to make it about me, right? You don't have to say, oh, because Chisom has this, we're creating this. No, how about like, we're just trying to do the same thing, and we're going to create a workplace that is fully accessible, and then it caters to everybody, right? It doesn't have to be, you know, zoned in on just one specific person.
Yes, and I know that it's possible. Thank you, Chisom. Also from Chugo, Tuna Seda, what processes, practices should workplaces implement to respect neurodiverse individuals, not just in recruitment, but in promotions? If you need me to say it again, I'll say it again.
No, it's all right. I've got it down here as well. I think Nikki's.
You can see it. Okay, very good.
Yeah, so we're all good. Look, I've never been promoted. I have no idea. No, genuinely, I don't know. If I had to take a wild guess, you know, processes and practices, you know, I think of like performance planning, and performance planning can be really intimidating. I had to do it the other day, and my manager asked me where I want to be in 3 to 5 years. And I just said, I don't know. I don't know. How am I supposed to know where I want to be in 3 to 5 years? I haven't decided what I want for dinner. Like, so I think what we need to talk about in terms of helping people be on the set themselves on the right trajectory for their careers and their lives and things like that. Like I said before, you just got to hook into their passions. Where do they want to take their passion and their strengths? And hopefully that comes with, you know, new opportunities for, you know, promotion and advancement and things like that as well. I just think there needs to be a little more structure around that sort of performance planning type stuff. I don't really know how it is in the Nordic countries or things like that, but here, at least where I'm working now, it's very vague. Like, what do you want to achieve? Blah blah blah. I'm like, I don't know. Are we going to be in a pandemic then? Like, who knows now? Like, so I think it's I don't have a clear answer because I don't know. If someone does know, let me know, and then I might be able to get a promotion.
Just wanted to from a basis of like recruitment, promotions, all of this, I think like I always just come back to, I don't think that one group of people should necessarily like, what should you do to ensure this? Like, I think for me, it comes back to, you know, inclusion and equity, right? Providing people with the resources that they need. Equality is not enough. Equity is very important, right? Acknowledging that people are different and that they need different things. And if that is integrated into the fabric of the organization, into the culture of your values, right? I think then when you create solutions, be it in recruitment, be it in promotions, be it in development, whatever it is, as long as you have that 100% circumspect, comprehensive inclusion in mind, then no one gets left behind. So I think we need to really look at it from that perspective, because then workplaces can easily say, oh, but you know, I can't really cater to every individual person and their individual challenges. You know, that is not the point. The point is when you create solutions for the most marginalized group, you automatically create solutions for everybody. So do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, that is such a great answer. So Mohani has a question. So she says she has a student with ADHD and she's very creative, but struggles to meet deadlines. How can I help her meet her deadlines? Giving her more time and prior notice to do a task does not always help. When she cannot meet deadlines, she feels disappointment. She has also taken on a lot of other work, which makes her achieving her goals more difficult. It would be good to get some advice on how I can ensure she delivers her best. Does anybody have any?
I can try to answer this because this really recognized myself in that position. And it goes back to like having, I guess my main question is what kind of tasks these are, because if it's something that's very numerical or it has to do with like natural science or something that doesn't really capture that student's interest, then that might actually be one of the reasons for the delay. Because the thing is, like, it takes a lot of attention and time to sit down and do a task when you're easily distracted, but even more so if you're not interested in the topic. So if it's something that has to do with another field, then what really captures her interest, get her to kind of see the importance of it, see the value of doing that tasks. Perhaps talk with the parents to get like to cooperate there. Preferably give her other deadlines, find other time slots in the day where she might work on these tasks. It's in the essence making it more goal-oriented and making it more interesting for the student, which is also probably one of the reasons why a person takes up more work, because they might be more interested in those like tasks. So
I quickly add to that. Completely agree. I think there are a lot of different things you can do. One of the surest way I know that you can find a solution is also to have a conversation with your students and see if you can both co-design what might work for your students. So what are the challenges they are facing? What can be useful? And I think sometimes just asking, even though the students might feel like, I don't know, just ask like, what do you think you actually need? Or how can we redesign this process for you? So I think like having that conversation with your students and see if you can co-create a solution, that would be a really good way.
Yes.
Another jumping in just quickly.
Yes,
just
please,
quickly.
Naseda.
I also, noticing that using she/her pronouns in this question, a lot of female identifying people, at least that I am in contact with, jump in, Runa, if you identify as well, are perfectionists. We a lot of ADHD and autistic women are perfectionists, and also deal with what's called rejection sensitive dysphoria, which is basically a heightened perception of rejection and criticism, whether real or perceived. So there can be this sort of impending feeling of not doing well, and therefore this feeling that you cannot do the work because it's not going to be what you want to do anyway. So that's stuff to talk about with a professional, because that is also a form of anxiety, and if it's going to impact on deadlines, which then impacts on her happiness and feeling comfortable and confident and all of that sort of thing, that's something to address as well. Also, bite-sized tasks, make it really, really small. Writing out a list of what you need to do is a task. So tick that off. That could be a thing as well. Also, deadlines can be quite harsh sounding and feeling, even calling them checkpoints or check-ins or whatever it might be, and creating a bit less pressure, even if they're just soft deadlines, and have some flexibility around them. That can be really helpful as well. Just take that pressure off.
Definitely. Thank you so much. I know I struggled with that. Definitely. Okay, I guess we came to an end. It's 3:01. I guess I'm not gonna, there are some more questions, but I guess we've talked about so many things and unpacked so many stuff and gave so much information that I think we can end it and feel quite satisfied that we've done a great job. Thank you so much to Rune, to Naseda, to Chisholm. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being honest. Thank you for being yourself. Thank you for being so open and sharing so many valuable information and your lived experience. Yes, and I can see from the comments in the chat that the audience also has appreciated your contribution, and I really hope that it helped a lot of people, that it informed a lot of people, and that for many people that this can be at least the beginning of even more understanding and exploration around this topic. I also hope that we will come back to this topic in some time.
Yeah, we need a 2.0, because I think even for us, like, we've been doing this now for how many, like almost 2 years, and we talk about equity, intersectionality, allyship. It comes up so much, and this is the first time we're doing anything about neurodiversity, right? So we also have to like do more and center it a bit more and shine more light on it, because it's not, the conversation is not being had enough. So I guess we also need to take responsibility there and start shoving it in people's faces until they understand it perfectly, like air.
Yes, and of so many things that you said, I wanted to follow up, like, yeah, but what about this? What about that? So there's so many more things to talk about, and I'm sure that it triggered a lot of things and questions in many people. So thank you so much. Happy birthday again, Naseda.
Happy
Thank
birthday!
you. Thank you. Oh, thank you, everyone.
I hope you have a great evening, because in Australia it's like 11.
Thanks for
Um,
spending,
Woohoo!
thanks for
Bed
spending your birthday with us.
Yes.
That's
We can
okay.
do
I
so.
already did my my celebration, so we're all good. I had an early dinner, which I do highly recommend. I love an early dinner.
I love an early dinner too. Okay, thank you, Rune. Thank you, Chisholm. And yeah, hope to see you soon.